Welcome to Chess Corner. Chess is one of the oldest games known to man. Over the past 2,000 years, it has spread to almost every country in the world. And in this time, it has gained an undeniable reputation as a game of sheer skill. It is only the level of skill that a player has that enables him to win at chess. In this series of programs, we are going to learn the fundamentals of good chess. For without basic principles, even a very thoughtful player will fall victim to a more knowledgeable opponent. Some of you will already have some knowledge of the game, and perhaps this first program, in which we will be dealing with rules and moves of the pieces, will seem very simple. But gradually, throughout the series, we will show more complex moves and positions which escape the majority. Techniques which the better players employ to beat their inferiors. It is quite surprising how often even good players make simple mistakes, because in their study of the game, they've skipped over some of the basic principles. We will start with examining the nature of the chessboard. As you can see, the board is a square. It has 64 squares, 8 by 8. On the chessboard, we have what we call a rank. Ranks go from left to right and right to left. This is the first rank, second rank, third rank, and on up to the 8th rank. Then we have the files, going from you, between you and your opponent. The ranks and the files and the diagonals, which go through the center of the board or at a 45-degree angle to the ranks and the files. Setting up the pieces and setting up the chessboard is always done with a white square in the right-hand corner. This is very important. Now, the center of the board, which is these 4 squares, I'll put pawns on them for you, are the most important squares on the board. From the center, everything stems. To strive to control the center, directly or indirectly, is very important, especially at the beginning of the game. We will start off with demonstrating how the pawn moves. There are 8 pawns, all on the second rank. Pawns can move forward, 1 space at a time. They cannot move backwards. But on the first move of each pawn, it has the privilege of moving 2 spaces. After that, it must continue 1 space at a time. Pawns capture very much unlike they move. As a matter of fact, if there is a pawn directly in front of your pawn, neither of these pawns can move unless, for instance here, there is a pawn to the front diagonal, in which case you can, if you wish, capture by moving into the square and removing the opponent's piece. So we see that the pawn captures by moving frontwards and to the diagonal of the left or the right. Now, the knight. The knight might seem a little difficult at first, but once you see it, it becomes very simple. The knight moves similar to an L. It moves 1 square up and 2 squares over, 1 square back and 2 squares over, 2 squares back and 1 square over, or frontwards. See? And it forms a very pretty little circle. The knight is the only piece that can jump over its own men as well as its opponents. It can move forwards and backwards. But if you start taking this knight and moving it towards the corner of the board, that circle starts to become smaller. Now it's cut in half. If you bring it all the way to the corner, as you can see, it's cut right in 4ths. So it's important to keep your knights centralized, or towards the center, where they have more mobility. Now, the bishop. The bishop always stays in the same color square that it starts out on. It moves diagonally. It moves as many spaces as it wishes, forwards or backwards, but it cannot jump over its own or its opponent's pieces. It captures, like other chess pieces, by moving into the opponent's square and removing the piece from the board. The bishop's mobility, as with the knight, is increased as it comes towards the center of the board. And one of the four squares that are the most important, of course, is its most mobile place. Now, the rook. The rook is the easiest of all the chess pieces to learn about. It moves on the ranks and on the files. The ranks and the files. It moves as many spaces as it wishes, forwards and backwards. It cannot jump over its own or its opponent's pieces. The unique thing about the rook is no matter where you put it on the board, it always moves and attacks the same amount of squares. There are two rooks, just like there are two bishops and two knights to start the game. Now the queen. Being the most powerful piece on the board, obviously can move to the greater number of squares. It can move like the rook and the bishop combined. That is, on the files and on the ranks and on the diagonals. As many spaces as it wishes, forwards or backwards. And the king, being the most important piece on the board, but not the most powerful, moves exactly like the queen, only one square at a time. There is another aspect of the king I think we should discuss now. A king can only move into spaces that are not attacked by an opponent's piece. As here, he cannot move into these three squares, nor can the other king move into the same three squares. They are opposing each other. To explain what check means with a king, we shall put a few pieces on the board. There are three basic ways of getting out of check. Whenever the king is attacked by an opponent's piece, it must get out, either by moving the king, if it can, or by interposing a piece, blocking the check, or, if you can, by capturing the opponent's checking piece. Now, checkmate is a position where the king has no squares to move to, there are no pieces to interpose, and there is no way of capturing the checking piece, as you see here, because it is guarded by the king, and the king could not move there. This is checkmate. The game is over. And then stalemate, where no one wins. As you see, this king has no squares to move to. But yet it is not being attacked. It is not in check. This is called stalemate. So as you see, all of the chess pieces have different moves. Some people think this makes the game more difficult, but it is this very fact that gives the game its attractiveness and appeal. We'll now show you how the pieces are set up. Two rooks at the ends of the board. Two knights right next to the rooks. Two bishops right next to the knights. The king and the queen are in the center, the queen always being on her own color. If she is black, on a black square. If she is white, on a white square. And the king on the opposite color. With the pawns, 8 of them, being directly in front. And now you are ready to start the game. Much is known about the game of chess, but much will never be known. That is because the game is so old, it developed even before the language we now use. The game has been exactly as we know it since the latest changes occurred in about 1600 AD. Before that, there were some differences in the rules. Going further back in history, we find continual developments which led to our present game. The earliest game, which had many similarities, is called Chaturanga. Chaturanga was found in early India about 600 AD. So we must say that no one actually invented the game, but that it simply developed. In the days of old, when battles took place between countries, the king took part in the battle. It is natural that the king should occupy a central position on the battlefield. He would not have as much power as the elephant or chariot, therefore his move is simple, 1 square at a time in any direction. Around this time, the idea that the king never dies was developed in Europe, and Shaman, which means the king is dead, as in Checkmate, when the game is over. The queen used to be known as a counselor, and it was not a very powerful piece at all. But as you can see today, the queen occupies a central position on the board and is the most powerful piece. You know, many great battles have been won and lost over a game of chess. It's been even said that Napoleon, upon finding an opponent in chess that he couldn't beat, would have him executed. But I think it all goes to show we should be careful on choosing our opponents. Wow. To continue our discussion on the pieces, the bishop was once an elephant, then a jester. You will notice the slit in the bishop. This was developed to resemble the bishop's hat, or mitre. There is some confusion whether the rook was once a ship or a chariot. It might have been both at different times and places. Our word for rook comes from the Persian. We sometimes call the rook a castle, and in some other languages it is a tower. The knight was a horse, and its move is the oldest, being the same in the early game of Chaturanga. At one time, the shape was that of an L, upside down. The L represents the curve of the horse's neck and the move of the pieces. Pawns are the foot soldiers of chess. The name, in fact, means foot soldier in Latin. As in ancient battle, there are many of them, and they are weak. Now that you understand the basic rules and moves of the game of chess, the best way to remember them is to play a game of chess. And for this, you will need, of course, a chess set. There are many chess sets available on the market, some as much as $100,000. But for practical purposes, you should get one about $5 with a Staunton design, as the sets that we have here, because they are easy to play with and widely accepted and used. Happy playing. Thank you. Good night.